Hello, and thank you for joining for this unique episode of News, War, and Spirituality. And joining us all the way from New York, from Brahma Kumaris, Gayatri, Naraine, hello to you.
Hello, Natalia.
When you first heard about the horrible news of October 7th, here from Tel Aviv, from Israel, from Gaza, what was your reaction?
Actually, I heard about it from the news, and that was on the 7th, I think, evening. And the next morning, I had to accompany someone to a hospital, and the person was doing a procedure. So after her procedure, I was invited to go to her room, and the person who was attending her, my eyes happened to fall on a pendant he was wearing on a chain around his neck, and it was the Star of David. And I looked at him and I made eye contact with him, and I said to him, "Do you have relatives in Israel?" And he became very, very still. And he looked at me and he said, "My entire family is in Israel. I'm the only one in New York." And then he further went on to say to me, "And I do not want to talk about it." And in that moment, I think what hit me was the enormity of what had happened through this person's eyes, through his response, and through the pain I felt in his heart. And then I said to him, first of all, I said to myself, how do I respond? What is my response here? And I said to him, I know there's nothing perhaps that I can do in this moment, and I definitely do not want to engage you in a conversation, but I'm a meditator. And so I will hold everyone in my meditation. And his response was, "That's what we need most of all. That's what we need. We all need to bring our hearts together. We all need to bring our pure feelings together." And so that was my first response to when I heard what was happening. And then I met someone who brought it to life. And then it began, the enormity of what was going on began to hit me.
Wow. And you're based and serving for decades and representing BK in the United Nations. So first of all, thank you for joining ContentoNow TV. And now there is an enormous amount of stories, personal stories, and we would like to reflect one story of Emily. She's 9 years old. Her father is living in Israel. He was born in Ireland.
All of a sudden, the door opened up and she just ran. It was beautiful, just like just like I imagined it. She's lost a lot of body weight, and the colour. I've never seen her so white. The other and the most shocking, disturbing part of meeting her was she was just whispering. Couldn't hear her. I had to put my ear on her lips, like this close, and say, "What did you say?" And she didn't know what the hell happened apart from that morning. So she's presumed everyone's kidnapped or killed or slaughtered, or she had no idea.
Emily was kidnapped. She was released, but part of her soul, it seems to be that remained there, and she's still whispering. So while you are hearing and you are serving in the United Nations in New York, thinking to yourself that, is there a cure for this soul?
There is a cure. Well, there's more than a cure. I think there is a healing. I could barely understand her. I can barely cipher out the whispers, but what I'm hearing is the pain and the grief. There is something in our souls that lives on no matter what. And that soul is life. And so the soul would be in trauma based on an experience the soul, the human being has just had, the child has just had, the fear, I suppose the anger as a result of that fear showing up. But there is a resilience in life. There is a resilience in the soul. And I feel that when that resilience kicks in, the soul will go into a space in which it will begin to heal. I feel also the fact that being kidnapped and getting out of that trauma of having been kidnapped, that child needs to have people around it that would remind it that there's more to life than just that moment in which it experienced that kidnapping and the fear from it, and starts to help the healing, that process of healing. And I suppose with programs like you're having, Natalia, it would help to do this. It would say, you know, that was an experience and the child needs the help for this. But how can I show and allow that child to heal through my feelings for that child, through my care for that child, through allowing the child to see that life continues and I can move out of it with the right type of nurturing. And I feel that that is very important right now. It is important to face the loss, but it is also important to find a place in our souls where we can turn that loss first into acceptance and then into healing. And it would take a lot of effort to do that because of what continues to happen. And then within an environment of a continuation of the violence, we have to turn within and look for the space within to heal and help others to do that as well.
As you mentioned, the war is continuing. Kidnaps are going out. Many are still there. There are missiles in not far away from here. We are based in Tel Aviv. It's only 1 hour and a half from Gaza, 2 hours from the border in Lebanon. And Gayatri, as we've mentioned, you've been serving as part of Brown Kumaris in the United Nations. And there is a quote made by the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, of the United Nations that we would love to share and to have your perspective regarding that.
I've been closely following dramatic events in Israel and Gaza. I will never forget the images of this supercharged cycle of violence and horror. We must avoid spillover of the conflict. I am concerned about the recent exchange of fire along the Blue Line and recent reported attacks from southern Lebanon. I appeal to all parties and those who have an influence over those parties to avoid any further escalation and spillover. I call for the immediate release of all Israeli hostages held in Gaza. Civilians must be protected at all times. International humanitarian law must be respected and upheld. About 220,000 Palestinians are now sheltered in 92 UNRWA facilities across Gaza. UN premises and all hospitals, schools and clinics must never be targeted. UN staff are working around the clock to support the people of Gaza, and I deeply regret that some of my colleagues have already paid the ultimate price. Crucial life-saving supplies, including fuel, food and water, must be allowed into Gaza. We need rapid and unimpeded humanitarian access now.
Do you think there is a practical UN solution here in the bleeding Middle East?
Well, you know, the United Nations is made up of governments. And I think that if governments come together and there is a will to uphold what Secretary General Guterres is calling for, that humanity, to hold up the dignity and worth of humanity, the will to go beyond our differences, and the will to look at human life as sacred. All life is sacred, but to look at human life in the light of that sanctity and a will to do the actions that Secretary General is talking about, I think it is possible. But from a spiritual perspective, being at the UN, I don't think that actions will just be based on a secular context, on the finances, on getting food to people. All of that is important. All of the basic needs are important. But if in our awareness and in our attitudes and in the way our perceptions, we carry these inbuilt biases of divisions, then there will be no will to do what we know to be right. And sometimes I think that's the dilemma that is faced, that in our conscience, we know what we need to do and what is right. But when it comes to have the will to do it, we falter because we're not looking at the inner construct of the actions. What is my awareness? What is my spiritual awareness here? What is my awareness of inclusion? What is my attitude? And then what is the vision or perception I should have before that action is taken? So I feel it needs to be a combination of both, the inner workings of the actions and then the practical manifestations of it.
But you know, many Israelis, Gayatri, right now they're saying there is almost no bridge between Israelis, Jews, and trying to create a symmetry between all human beings is being right now very, very challenged. I would like to show you one voice that I think reflects many, many Israelis right now.
התנאים שם ממש קשים, אין הרבה אוכל, יש רעב.
לא היה אוכל, פיתה וחצי. היה להם את הבוס שלהם שם מגיע ומביא אוכל. פעם ביומיים, היה מביא כאילו חבילת פיתות. מה שתאכלו תאכלו בשלושה ימים האלה. הוא היה כאילו הראשי שמתעלל בנו פסיכולוגית.
היו הרבה פעמים שהם היו אומרים לנו שלביבי לא אכפת ממנו ושכחו אותנו. זה גם הייתה התחושה שם.
כל הזמן אומרים, לא רוצים אתכם, משפחות לא רוצות שתחזרו, הם לא פועלות ולא עושות שום דבר, אתם הולכים להישאר פה לפחות שנה.
היה לי הרבה מחשבות של האם אני אצא פה, אם אני אחזור למשפחה שלי, אולי יהרגו אותי.
It's very hard to listen to it, isn't it? And I suppose the question we are asking ourselves, how did we get to this state? How did we as human beings reach to a state in which we could do those atrocities? And this is why I feel that we need to re-experience what life is. Because right now, I think life has become something that is meaningless. First of all, to myself, that's why I can do things like that. and I can treat other people's lives the way that my own life is being treated. So I feel from a spiritual perspective, and I am speaking from a spiritual perspective, the effort is to relook and re-experience life. When we say that life is sacred, what are we talking about? Is it just the body that I can kill and I can stab and I can do all those awful violent acts to? Or am I harming something else that is in this body? And what is that something else that we have lost sight of, that we are no longer experiencing to be part of what makes up a human being? And what are the consequences that are embedded in these acts and the impact that is left on the perpetrator as well as the victim? And so I feel that within all of the chaos that we are facing, I think it's also an exceptional time for us to relook at it, for a spiritual dimension to be looked at in the way that perhaps we could re-experience and redefine what life is all about.
You know, you're talking about re-experiencing life, re-evaluating them, because most or many of the people that were kidnapped and stabbed and murdered here in Israel, there were people that are speaking your language, liberal people, people that are living in the border, yet they want to accomplish and cherish life. Listen to the things that is mentioning Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State of the United States.
This is my fourth trip to Israel since the horrific Hamas attacks of October 7th. So I'm here just over 3 months, 95 days since those attacks occurred. We know that for the people who are most affected by the attacks and the conflict that's followed, time moves differently. Immediately before this, I met with the families of hostages being held in Gaza and with hostages who've been released. Several of those families I've now met multiple times. For them, every day, every hour, every minute that they're separated from their loved ones is an eternity. Time feels different for families in Gaza as well, hundreds of thousands of whom are experiencing acute food insecurity. For the mother or father trying to find something to feed a hungry child, the passage of another day without food is excruciating. Time also feels different for Israelis and Palestinians whose innocent loved ones have been killed. For them, time often falls into before and after. The after filled with a loss that most of us will never know and cannot fully imagine.
So in order to build bridges with this kind of sub-people, the violence that is being taken place by the IDF in these hours is part of self-defense.
You know, the word defense is an interesting word. What am I defending myself against? And how? What are the means that I'm using for that defense? So we're always told that, you know, you don't fight fire with fire, but there are certain things that require us to do when we are in the face of such hatred and such evil. A defense would be that we have to take certain actions. And I think that's what was being addressed there. However, where are the bridges? Where do we start building these bridges? Because the government will take a position, and the people who are hurt directly by what had happened or what is happening, they will have a certain position. But then there are those who are saying, well, is there another way? Is there a way that we can build those bridges? Is there an unlearning that needs to happen and a relearning of something that we have to look at here? Is there a different perspective that we can have when we are looking to see how we respond to these situations, to these evil things that are happening? And I feel that this is the middle ground. The bridges will have to be built at a middle ground in which there will be people from both Israel and maybe people from Palestine who have got what I call an enlightened conscience, who are saying that is liquidating one or the other going to be the answer? Or is there a middle ground that we can use to start building bridges in the face of death and destruction on both sides? How do we build these bridges? And I think that this is where sometimes I feel, and at the United Nations, there's something that's called a meditation room. And Dag Hammarskjöld said that he's building this room so that the diplomats could go into this room of quiet where only thoughts speak. And they're not just thoughts reacting to what is happening, but they're thoughts that are coming from a deeper conscience, a deeper sense of reasoning, a deeper sense of asking the question, is there another way? Is there a transcendent way? Is there a way that I can, what the Charter of the UN says, reaffirm the dignity and worth of the human person? Is there some other way we could do this rather than the escalation of the violence that seems to be taking place? And I think it is something that when you're actually going through something you don't want to hear, it is something that makes no meaning when you're going through a pain like the Middle East is going through, or Ukraine and Russia is going through, or other parts of the world. But I think that it is something that needs to be addressed. If we are really going to reaffirm that dignity and worth of human life, we have got to look at it another way.
You know, you're mentioning the other way and trying to look another way, and you were challenging self-defense from the spiritual way of seeing it. And behind you, there is a picture of the founder,
Yes.
Brahma Kumaris. And I think one of the stories, part of his legacy, was that I believe it was in Karachi, that he was almost someone came to his room and tried to kill him personally a few decades ago. And what do you think that people should self-defend themselves in the physical world also, sometimes if it's needed, also using, forgive me for my direct word, violence in order to keep their life together?
That's a human question you're asking me. And so we all want to defend ourselves. We want to defend our families. We want to defend our communities, our neighborhoods, etc. But when it comes to defense, my question is, and I suppose Brahma Baba, the founder, is defense the only way to defense is through violence? Self-defense, is it only through violence? And what I suppose he believed in was in nonviolence. So even when someone came up to him and held the weapon, perhaps, to attack him, because he was internally in that state of remembrance of God, because that was what the spirituality that he's taught us was all about, to have this connection to God and to draw the strength and power from God. And if you're in that state of your natural state of nonviolence, then that has the power to change the intention of the other person. And the intention of the other person means you kind of dilute the anger and dilute the violence in the other. So the other then operates from a state of reasoning that says, this is not right. This is not something I can do. Now, that is what Brahma Baba taught us in terms of spiritual strength, in which if you are aligned with your nature, which is of nonviolence and peace, and someone is in front of you, you have that power to change their intention. But that is over a long period of time of practice. So a human being in self-defense could also use the spiritual strengths to do that. But because we don't have that spiritual strength, we then use whatever ways and means are available to protect ourselves. But in protecting ourselves, whether it's through having a gun or whether it's through having weapons or whatever may be the case, that escalates the violence. Now, we're at a state in our world in which violence, I think, is at its maximum. Sometimes I feel, how much more can violence get? It's almost at its maximum. So the other way for me is there a way that we could turn within? Is there a way we could look at certain universal laws of life and experience them in a way that could bring out from human beings, but in a collective way, a different response? And what that response is, I'm not able to draw you, a total picture of it. But what I'm saying is that it does work. But there needs to be a reaffirmation of that and a practice over a long period of time.
Because when you're saying connection to God will lead that the terrorist will drop down his weapon, there were people that were not fighting in the border of Israel with weapons. They were fighting with agriculture, with education. They were helping Palestinians throughout the borders most of their lives. So I don't think that the people there were violent. They were just living. It was Saturday. It was part of the holiday in Israel. So what I would love to get your help into practicality. How these wonderful values can be implemented practically in ground with so many Israelis that are suffering right now. And I'm sure that there are many Palestinians that are suffering too.
I think it takes a person like you. I think it takes people like you who are exploring a different dimension, because it's war and it's spirituality here. And so what it's saying, in a state of war, in a state of violence, do I give up the goodness that I know that I have? I am by nature, I have been helping. I have been serving humanity. I have been doing all of this. And so if that is who I am and what I am by nature, am I prepared to say I'm no longer that? And now I'm going to drop my goodness. In other words, I'm going to drop my good tools, and I'm going to now inculcate tools that would destroy the very people I was helping? Or am I going to reinforce something to say that here, if we are living in a world of evil against good, or we are living in a world of darkness against light, what do I choose? What it is I want to conserve? I think that's the question. As I'm facing violence, what it is I want to conserve. And if I want to conserve life and goodness, and I want to conserve the things that will be sustaining and allow us to flourish, then it takes a spiritual strength to do that. And a spiritual strength is not something like pie in the sky. A spiritual strength is harnessed from a connection to an inner good. And that inner good defines who I am. And that inner good gives expression to the service and to the work I do in my relationship to humanity. And I shouldn't allow violence to take that away from me, even though I have to face it and I may have to defend myself in different ways, but it shouldn't take away what I know myself to be in terms of my own goodness.
You're searching for many years also, creating research and exploring the connection of media and empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Because media, and I have many, many close friends and colleagues, while they're talking about being journalists, they are eager for the great story, for the greater rating, for creating impact. The word empathy is not the first one in the chart book.
Mm-hmm.
So, Israeli, Palestinian media, international media, especially in the times of war, what would you recommend?
I would say to them, you know, the media could also cover restorative narratives. They could also cover stories that are talking about not just how people were damaged and how people were compromised, but they could also cover stories that talk about how people's resilience was activated. They could also talk about stories that created some kind of hope in people, that when you get to a point in which you have hit the bottom, there is something that life says, you know, there's hope here. Get up. Let it be a springboard. Let it be something that you could do, you could take and make meaning of. And so I feel that the restorative aspect of the media is what is required here and now, because my concern is who is helping those who are returning. The hostages are returning. What kind of help, what kind of rehab help is being given to them? Who is helping them to heal their feelings? Who is helping them to see that life will go on and you will direct what your life will be with our help? Is all the life force going toward revenge, which may be there, but how much of our life force, of our spiritual life force, is going towards rebuilding and restructuring our state of being on the inside? How much of it is going to see, is this the end of me? Is this the end of my life? What can I do to regrow, to rehabilitate, to do all these things? That for me is what very important at this time. Is the media covering that? Or is the media only focused on the damages done and not the growth that is taking place from the damage done in relation to personal growth, in relation to personal well-being?
The media is covering basically the conflicts, and one of them, for instance, the former president of the United States, Barack Obama, tried to reveal his perspective in creating kind of a symmetry between the conflict from the Israeli side and the Palestinian side. And one of his closest friends, one of the voices, the legal voices of Professor Ellen Dershowitz, he mentioned what he thinks, and that was covered by the media.
You can't make those kinds of comparisons, Barack Obama, and I have to tell you, what you did is just despicable. It's beneath contempt. And whatever respect I had for you, I have absolutely lost. Fortunately, so have many other Americans lost respect for you. And I'm hoping that you have no influence on the current administration, future Democratic administrations, and that your lack of morality ends up in the dustbin of history where it belongs. And so I'm ashamed that I was your friend. I'm ashamed that I invited you to my birthday party. I'm ashamed that I accepted your invitation to the Oval Office, and I'm ashamed that I allowed you to fool me into thinking that you actually supported Israel. You do not. Nobody who has any love for Israel in their heart would ever make the kind of obscene, obnoxious comparison you made between murder, rape, kidnapping, burning of civilians, and a disputed occupation that could have ended over and over again if the Palestinians had only accepted the deals.
You know, many Israelis are feeling this way towards the United Nations these days.
Mm-hmm.
You're serving there. Is there something that you could say to address those concerns of Israeli and Israeli supporters?
Well, I would say, first of all, let me say I was in Jerusalem in 2019, and just before the COVID hit. And I would say, you know, when you visit a country and you meet with the people and you mingle with the local people, which I was doing, you realize that they have homes, they have hearts, they have relationships, they want to live in safety. That, for me, is what the majority of people in Israel want. And if that is so, when their country is violated, then they would feel what that person just expressed. Of course, they would feel that. When it comes to the United Nations work with governments. And so every country is bringing its own opinion to the table, its own voice to the table. And what I would say to the people of Israel is that, having recognized that, in a place like the United Nations, first of all, it is there to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war with the support of the governments. That has not happened. But it is also there to uphold, to reaffirm the dignity and worth of the human person, the respect for the human life. And I feel that that is what the people of Israel, with their friends at the UN, will have to uphold. They will have to uphold it for themselves. And they continuously bring that voice to the governments, whether you do it on the field in Israel or you do it at the United Nations itself. I would say to you, never compromise on your own dignity and worth. But I would also say, from a spiritual perspective, you don't have to fight for that. You just have to reiterate it in who you are, with your own dignity and worth. And because every human being is worthy of that, is worthy of recognizing the sanctity of life. And I feel that I would say to the Israeli brothers and sisters, never stop seeing yourself through the light of that dignity and worth.
Gayatri, Naraine, what was your personal, most profound moment in your personal life?
I think the most profound moment, and I want to say it's a profound moment that just recently happened to me, because, you know, profound moments are moments that happen progressively as you grow in your life. And that is, a few years ago, I met an individual who wrote a book. And she wrote the book called First They Killed My Father, A Daughter of Cambodia Remembers. And at the time she wrote the book, I was part of something called Images and Voices of Hope. And she did it as a process, I think, of her own healing and as a restorative piece. She came and she presented it, and that I did not appreciate, because I wasn't connecting to Cambodia. I wasn't connecting to what was happening there. And as I told you earlier, I came back from Bali 8 days ago, in which we had a call of the time dialogue. And I met with a person from Cambodia who then explained to me a trauma that he was going through. And then all of a sudden, the profundity of what he was saying hit me. That here he was as an individual trying to heal from a trauma that the Khmer Rouge took them through in the 1970s. And he was still looking for the person who killed his father. And then this book, I came back to the United States, and the first thing I did was to read this book so that I could understand what this individual was going through and maybe how to help him. So for me, one of the most profound moment in my life that I'm going through now is when people are going through, like the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, and people are left as victims of a trauma that they cannot deal with years ahead of them, then my profundity in that is, how do I respond to them first? And then how do I help? How am I to be of service to such people? Because it's happening over and over and over again. And maybe the time of prevention is no longer there. But what we're having to face is a time of how to heal. And healing is a profound spiritual act. It is something I feel that requires a great deal of maturity in order for growth to take place. So that's my most recent profound moment.
And in order to help people to heal their wounds, to stop being or believing that they are victims, in order to prevent the next murder or the next revenge, do you think that silence is one of the tools that you would recommend?
Silence, yes, but we have to understand what silence is. Silence is not a place of escape. And so I call it yogic silence, because yoga means connection. So I move into a sacred space within, which I call as the soul, and I connect to the source of spiritual strength, whom I call God, a supreme soul. And I see myself as a light, life force, and I see God as a light. I don't see God having a physical form. I don't see my own life having a physical form, but it comes into a physical body and it gives itself expression. But when I'm in silence, I connect my soul, which is a spiritual being of light, living light, to God, which is the source of light. And there is a silence there. And in that silence, a transformation occurs.
Gayatri, Naraine, do you think it can be practiced in times of people that are fighting, in times of war, when people are kidnapped? It can be done there, or only in a sacred mountain in India, or in times of peace?
I think it could happen at both, because I feel that when I am most scared, when I think that this is my last moment, this is my last breath, invariably the soul automatically reaches out to connect to something. And that something is usually God. And they connect for help. And so I feel that at the most extreme, it could happen. And then you're sitting in a mountain on a mat in peace, you are progressively doing that practice. But if you've never done that practice, I think at the moment, at that last moment, in that dire moment of fear, and the soul knows it's about to leave, it does connect in an automatic way. However it sees God, it will connect.
So maybe we can use your experience. So you could, for a few short but profound moments, can lead from New York a meditation to the people that are suffering here and now, families, the victims, the kidnapped people that might listen to you. Something that you think that can be shared in these specific times of war here in the Middle East.
Sure. So, my dear brothers and sisters of the Middle East, please join me in a meditation of recognizing ourselves as children of one God. I move into an inner sanctuary, a sacred space, a space that when I connect to, I can draw strength. In this space, with the power of my thoughts and the power of my feelings, I transcend for a moment, just a moment, the pain and the grief, the anger and the frustration, and the fear. And I connect to a source. This source is God the Divine, a source that I draw strength from, a source that protects me deeply, telling me that I'm immortal, telling me that I'm protected, telling me that when I'm in the remembrance and love of this source, I'm safe. My dear brothers and sisters, be in this space of your strength. Connect to the source and feel safe. Om Shanti, peace, shalom.
Peace, shalom, Om Shanti, and we hear from Tel Aviv hope that also it can reaches beyond any borders, any physical borders, and also to create salam. The people that are looking for peace also from the other side of the border. And one of the books that you read, and thank you for the kind meditation and the warm words, was Something Beyond Greatness, trying to reach there. Is there any example from your personal life that you felt that you are reaching there and it can be shared after this meditation?
Yes, my story, and I'm glad you're asking me because I really want to leave with this story. When I was I was at a conference in Jerusalem in 2019, December, because I wanted to visit the Church of Nativity. I went to a Catholic school. And as I was standing in front of one of the churches, a Palestinian guy ran up to me with a picture of his daughter. And he was saying, "Sister, sister, sister." And he was telling me, and there was a translator, all about his daughter having cancer, and he's earning just to get her treated in Jordan, and he just lives his life taking her once a week for this treatment. And then I looked him in the eye and I said, "What do you want me to do?" And he says, "Sister, I want you to bless her." So then I looked at the picture, and of course, I did the kind of meditation I just did, bring her into the light of God and let, the love of God shower the picture and, of course, her soul. And then I left. And the next day, I'm in Jerusalem and I'm in a taxi. And there is the taxi driver, an Israeli brother, and he's saying to me, "Sister, sister, sister, I can take you to see lots of beautiful places in Jerusalem. And, you can trust me. I would take you and you'll be saved." And when I heard this happen, that book, Something Beyond Greatness, came back to me, because there are 3 principles in that book. And the 3 principles are seeing with love, acting from the heart, and you're always in the right place at the right time to do the right thing. So I felt both times, both being with this Palestinian guy and his daughter's picture, and being with this Israeli brother in a taxi, that was what came out of me for them. And so when I look at what's going on in the Middle East, I feel that no matter who, I must see with love, I must act from the heart, and I will always be in the right place at the right time to do the right thing, because both saw me as a sister. And so as a sister, that's what I'll do for both. And I suppose when you show up like that, fear has no place, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what will happen, because you will just do what you're meant to do for the love of humanity, for the greater good. So that book taught me that, and I experienced it when I was in your region.
Gayatri Naraine, joining us from New York, the representative for so many years in the United Nations of Brahma Kumaris. I want to thank you very much for joining us here at this show. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia.
And thank you all for joining all this episode of News, War, and yet also spirituality, ContentoNow TV.